We continue now with the Gemara on the top of Daf Yud Dalid Amud Beis in Maseches Brachos. This is Berachos 14b. The Gemara just concluded with the halacha of Rabbi Yehuda that a person should say Hashem Elokeichem Emes together. He should connect Hashem Elokeichem at the end of Kriya Shema with Emes v'Yatziv and Emes v'Emuna, and the source is from the following pasuk. This is a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, top of the page. Hashem Elokim Emes, the pasuk says Hashem Elokim is Emes. Since the pasuk puts together the word Elokim and the word Emes, therefore we put it together as well. We do not want to make a separation, according to Rabbi Yehuda, between these two words. The Gemara asks, Chozer v'yomer Emes? Oeno Chozer v'yomer Emes. Do we repeat the word Emes after we've said it one time going into the next bracha, or do we not repeat the word Emes? Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Avo says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Chozer v'yomer Emes. We do repeat the word Emes. Rabba Amar Eino Chozer v'yomer Emes. Rabba says we do not repeat the word Emes. Hahu denachas kamei de Rabba. There was once somebody who was davening in front of Rabba. Shamei Rabba de Amar Emes Emes Trei Zimne. Rabba heard that he said Emes 2 times. He repeated the word Emes. Amar Rabba, Rabba said, Kol Emes Emes Tafsei Lahai. This person has this compulsion to be saying the word Emes over and over again, indicating that it was not appropriate. Amar Rav Yosef says, Kama Ma'alya Hashmaita, how nice is the following sugya, the Chiyasa Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, Amar, because when Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda came, he said, Amri b'ma'arava, that they say in the West as follows, Arvis, when they are davening in the evening Kriya Shema, they say as follows, Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yamartu alehem. They say, speak to Bnei Yisrael and say to them. That's the beginning of the third parsha of Shema, what we refer to as the parsha that has tzitzis in it. But then they skip the whole part of tzitzis and they just say, Ani Hashem Elokeichem Emes. Why do they skip it? Because it's nighttime, there's no obligation of tzitzis. So how nice is it that they say this abridged version and don't mention tzitzis, since that's not a mitzvah this time. So Amar le Abaye said to him, My mal Yusa, what is so great about doing that? V'amar Rav Kahana Amar Rav. Didn't Rav Kahana say in the name of Rav, Lo Yazchil, you shouldn't begin the parsha, V'im Hischel, but once you begin Gomer, you have to complete the parsha. So it's not appropriate what they're doing, because they are beginning the parsha and not finishing the whole thing, they're skipping. V'chitem, and if you're going to try to answer V'yamarta Alehem Lo Have Haschola, that the words V'yamarta Alehem is not yet considered beginning that parsha. V'amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Amar Rav, but Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak said in the name of Rav, Daber el b'nei Yisrael lo have haschola, v'yamarta aleim have haschola. That if you say just the words Daber el b'nei Yisrael, that is not considered haschola. But if once you say the words v'yamarta aleim, that is considered haschola, and they should have to finish. So it doesn't seem like what they're doing is so praiseworthy. Amar Rav Papa says, Chasavri b'ma'arava, no, because they hold in the West, V'yamarta aleim nami lo have haschala, that the words V'yamarta aleim are not beginning of the parsha, they're not considered a haschala. Ado amar v'asu lahem tzitzis. The real beginning of the parsha is when you say the words v'asu lahem tzitzis, and that is what they are doing in the West. Amar Abaya says, Hilkach, therefore, anon aschule maschalinon dekamischali b'ma'arava. We, here in Bavel, we have to begin the parsha, because that's what they do in Bavel, they begin it in that fashion. And once we begin, migmar nami gamrinan, we have to finish the whole thing, because we hold that once you get to the words v'yamarta aleim, that is considered beginning, so we'll end up saying the whole thing. So we do what they do in the West, in Eretz Yisrael, but then we're going to also finish the parsha, because we hold that's already considered beginning the parsha. Amar Rav Kahana Amar Rav, because Rav Kahana said in the name of Rav, lo yaschil v'im hischil gomer. A person shouldn't begin, but once he begins, he needs to finish. Chia Barav Omar. Chia Barav says, Omar ani Hashem Elokeichem. If a person says the words Ani Hashem Elokeichem, Tzarech Lomar Emes, then he needs to also say the word Emes. However, Lo Amar Ani Hashem Elokeichem, if he doesn't say the words, that phrase Ani Hashem Elokeichem, Eino Tzarech Lomar Emes, he does not need to say the word Emes. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? V'haboy lad kuri Yetzias Mitzrayim. Doesn't the person need to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is what we mention in Emes v'Yatziv? So how are you getting out of saying this? So the Gemara answers, Da'amar hachi, he could say as follows, Modim anachnu l'cha Hashem Elokeinu, shotzeisanu me'eretz Mitzrayim, uftisanu mibeis havadim, v'yasiso lanu nisim ugvuros al hayam v'sharanu lach. He could simply say, we thank you, Hashem, for taking us out of Mitzrayim, for redeeming us from the beis havadim, from the house of slaves, doing all these miracles upon the sea, and we praise you, we sing to you for this. And that suffices in terms of mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Gemara now brings the Mishnah here. Amar Rav Yoshua ben Karcha lama kinma parshas Shema. Rav Yoshua ben Karcha was trying to explain why is the parsha of Shema before V'hoyim Shemoa, and Rav Yoshua ben Karcha in the Mishnah said, first you have to be Makabel Ol Malchus Shemayim, you have to accept upon yourself the yoke of heaven, and only then do you accept upon yourself the yoke of mitzvos, and that's why the first parsha of Shema, which has V'yahavta, comes before the second parsha, which is V'hoyim Shemoa. Tanya, we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, Badinu sheyakdim Shema l'v'hoyim Shemoa. Really, it is proper that Shema should be in front of V'hoyim Shemoa, as it is. Why? For the following reason. Shezel lilmod v'zel lelamed. Because V'yahavta is about learning the Torah, and V'hoya is about teaching the Torah. So V'yahavta should come first, because learning precedes teaching. V'hoya im Shemoa l'vayomer, and also it makes sense that V'hoya im Shemoa comes before Vayomer. Shezel lilmod, because this one is learning. Shazeh, and this should really be lelamed, really. This one is teaching. V'zel lasos, and this one is doing the mitzvah, so teaching should come before doing. So that is Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, in contrast to Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. That's Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai's reasoning of why one parsha should come before the other. So the Gemara now first goes into his reasoning to try to understand it. Atu Shema lilmod isbe lelamed v'lasos lesbe. First of all, the parsha Shema, does it only have learning and not teaching and doing? V'aksiv v'shinantam ukshartam uchsaftam. It has all three: learning, and it has also and it has v'shinantam is teaching, and then it also has ukshartam uchsaftam, which is doing. So it has all three. It's got learning, teaching, and doing. V'su v'hoyam shamoa lelamed hu deisbe v'lasos lesbe. V'hoyam shamoa has teaching and it doesn't have doing. V'aksiv ukshartam uchsaftam. It has doing. You have to put up you have to put the tefillin on, you have to put the mezuzah up. That's doing. So rather, Elohachi Kama. Rather, here's what Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai meant. Badinu shetekadem shema levahoyim shamoa shezez lilmod ulalamed vilasos. V'yahavta should come first. Shema should come first before V'hoya, because it has all three: learning, teaching, and doing. V'hoyim im shamoa levayomer, and V'hoyim shamoa should come before Vayomer. Shezeh yesh bo lelamed vilasos, because V'hoyim shamoa again has two elements: teaching and doing. Vayomer ein bo elolasos, and Vayomer only has doing. Ein bo elolasos bilvad, it only has doing. So that's that was the real reasoning of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, that the parshas with more things in them come first. Shema has all three, V'hoyim shamoa has two, and Vayomer has one. So now the Gemara asks, V'tei pegleim Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. General question: why did Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai have to come up with his own answers? Why didn't he just go with the answer of Rabbi Shimon ben Karcha, that Ol Malchus Shamayim comes before all mitzvahs? So the Gemara answers, Chada v'yod kamar. He's giving one reason. There's another reason. Chada kadei sheikabel all of Ol Malchus Shamayim tchila v'achar kach yikabel all of all mitzvahs. One reason we have is the reason of Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, first mikabel Ol Malchus Shamayim, then all mitzvahs. V'yod mishum dis bahani mili achroni. And also the other reason is because we have these other components. Shema has more components than V'hoyim Shemoa, and V'hoyim Shemoa has an additional component over Vayomer. Now the Gemara goes into Rav's ordering of whether he said Kriya Shema first, whether he put on Tefillin first, and that becomes a discussion of the Gemara till the end of the page. Rav Moshe Yodei v'kara Kriya Shema v'anach Tefillin v'tzali. Rav would wash his hands, he would say Kriya Shema, then he would put on Tefillin, and then he would daven. So the Gemara asks, V'heichi avid hachi, how did he do it in this order? V'hatanya, but we learned in a brayso, hachofer kuch lameis bekever. If somebody is digging a grave, in the old times they used to have graves inside these caves. So if someone is digging one of these graves, pater mi kriya shema umin hatzfila umin hatzfilin. He is pater from kriya shema, tefillah, and tefillin. We call mitzvahs hamuras b'torah, and he's pater from all mitzvahs. He gias man kriya shema. When kriya shema comes, ola v'notel yadav. He should get up. He should wash his hands. Uminiach tefillin. He should put on tefillin. V'korei kriya shema umisbal. And he should read kriya shema, and he should daven. So here in this brayso, the ordering is the opposite. Here in this brayso, first the person is putting on tefillin, then reading kriya shema. This is different than what Rav did, who first read kriya shema and then put on tefillin. But before the Gemara gets to that kasha, the Gemara just has a question on the brayso itself. Haguva kasha. This brayso seems to be internally contradictory. Reisha Amar Pater. First you said in the beginning he's digging this grave, so he's pater from all these things. The Seifa Chayiv. Then at the end you talk about the fact that kriya shema comes. He has to say kriya shema. So the Gemara says, Holo kasha. That's not a kasha. Seifa betray v'reisha b'chad. The end of the brayso is talking about when you have two people who are digging the grave, so one can leave to fulfill his obligation while the other one digs the grave. That's why there's an obligation. And in the beginning of the brayso, when it said you're exempted, it's when you were the only one doing it. But mikol makom kasha l'Rav. Nevertheless, it's a difficulty on Rav. Why did Rav first read kriya shema and then put on tefillin? So the Gemara answers, Rav Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha svirale. Rav held like Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, our Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha in our Mishnah. De Amar ol malchus shamayim tchila v'achar kach ol mitzvos. What does Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha say? He says first ol malchus shamayim. First you accept upon yourself the yoke of heaven, and then the yoke of mitzvos. So too Rav. First he read Kriyas Shema. That's ol malchus shamayim, and then ol mitzvos. Then he did the mitzvah of putting on tefillin. So he was following this different opinion of Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Amor Damar Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha lahakdim kriya lekriya. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha's entire idea was just to say which parsha you read before which other parsha. Kriya la'asiya mi shamadla. He never went so far as to say that a person should read before he puts on tefillin. Kriya la'asiya, reading before actually doing the mitzvahs. He never said such a thing. Visu, and further, mi savar like Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. Does Rav even hold like Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha? Does he really even say this? Does he really even say that a person should read Shema before putting on tefillin? V'amar Rav Chia Barashi. Rav Chia Barashi said, Zimnin sagin havo kimno kame de Rav. There was a times that I was standing in front of Rav. Umakdim umasha yadim uvarich. And what would he do? He would wash his hands. He would make Birchas HaTorah. Oh, masni lon pirkin, and he would teach us the parak. Umanach tefillin, and then he would put on tefillin. V'hadar kari Kriyas Shema, and then he would read Kriyas Shema. So exactly the opposite of what we saw Rav doing before. Here we have a story from Rav Chia Barashi where he's actually first putting on tefillin and then reading Kriyas Shema. Now, if you're going to say that in this particular case, the reason why he delayed saying Kriyas Shema was because the time of Kriyas Shema had not yet come, if that's the case, what's the point of this whole testimony of Rav Chia Barashi? Obviously, if the time hadn't come yet, he wouldn't say it. So the Gemara says that's not a difficulty. It could be that Rav Chia Barashi's testimony was not to teach us anything regarding Kriyas Shema and Tefillin. It was to teach us a different halacha, that he made Birchas HaTorah even though he was just teaching Mishnah. There was a man Damar who said that when you're learning Mishnah, you don't need to make Birchas HaTorah. That's why this testimony of Rav Chia Barashi was to tell you that Rav, he would wash his hands, make Birchas HaTorah, and then teach us to show us that you have to make Birchas HaTorah for this kind of learning. But the Gemara says, Mikol Makom Kasha LeRav. We still have this difficulty of Rav. At the end of the day, in one case, Rav is saying Kriyas Shema first, then wearing tefillin, and in the other case, the reverse. What's going on? Gemara answers, Shluchu Hudav. Very simple answer. The Shliach of Rav, he was the one that didn't bring the tefillin on time in the first case. When Rav washed his hands, read Kriyas Shema, and then put on tefillin, it was simply because the Shliach was delayed in bringing him the tefillin. 2 dots here at the bottom of the page. Amar Ula says, Kol HaKorei Kriyas Shema below tefillin. Anybody who reads Kriyas Shema without tefillin, Ki'ilu Meyud Eidus Sheker Biatzmo. If someone reads Kriyas Shema without tefillin, it is as if he is testifying false testimony. Because in Kriyas Shema, they talk about tefillin, and this person's not even wearing tefillin. Am Rabbi Chia Barabba, Am Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia Barabba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Ki'ilu Hikriv Ola below Mincha. It's similar to bringing a carbon Ola without the accompanying Mincha. V'zevach below Nesachim. It's similar to bringing a carbon without the accompanying libation of wine without the Nesachim. 2 dots. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Harotzi sheyakabel olav ol malchus shamayim shlema. If a person wants to fully accept upon himself ol malchus shamayim, he should do as follows. The Gemara will continue this discussion on Daf Tes Vav Amar Aleph in the next video.